This video is sponsored by Manscaped, the best in men's grooming. More about them later in the video. Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tips. My name is Julian, and in today's episode we're doing a video that we did last year, one that was very popular last year, one that you guys really seem to enjoy, so I'm putting it out once again. This is the top 10 fantasy rookies of the 2022-2023 season. Before we get started, guys, please leave a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell if you want notifications for all my off-season content. Trust me, guys, I'm going to be putting out some really solid content to help you guys with your draft, so you're going to want to hit that notification bell so you get notified every time I post a video this preseason. Now, let's be clear before we start. This is the top 10 fantasy rookies, not necessarily the top 10 rookies. You could have a defenseman that plays incredibly well in his back end, but isn't producing a lot up front, and therefore might be one of the top 10 rookies this year, but is not someone who's going to be fantasy relevant, and therefore probably won't be included in this list. So we'll start off with some honorable mentions, and I got JJ Peterka on the Buffalo Sabres, Jacob Pelletier on the Calgary Flames, Peter Kochetkov on the Carolina Hurricanes, Simon Edvinsson on the Detroit Red Wings, Kalen Addison on the Minnesota Wild, Thomas Bordeleau on the San Jose Sharks, Hendrik Lapierre, and Connor McMichael on the Capitals. Now, I do like a lot of these guys. I just don't think they're going to make enough of a splash this year based on their deployment and some other factors that's going to make them one of the top 10 or top 15 guys this year. And before we get into the top 10 guys, I do actually have players ranked 15 through 11, so you guys know exactly who I have just outside of the top 10. And at number 15, I have Alexander Holtz of the New Jersey Devils. Now, for those of you that don't know, Alexander Holtz was the 7th overall pick in 2020, and he's going to be a great player. Was a point per game in the AHL last year. I don't think he's going to make too much of an impact this year in the NHL, though, because the Devils, as things stand right now, have a pretty full lineup. They have 9 pretty solid players to fill out their top 3 lines. And unless there's an injury, I don't really see Holtz necessarily playing in the NHL to start the year. I do think that when injuries do happen, he'll be called up and you'll have, maybe some solid stretches here and there. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to stick around in the NHL this year. And if he does, I don't see him doing as well as some of the other guys on this list. Next, I have Jake Sanderson, and a lot of people have him ranked pretty high in terms of fantasy value this year. And I just don't see it. As long as Thomas Chabot is on the team, Jake Sanderson's not going to be seeing top power play time. He's probably going to see third pairing minutes as well. May see power play 2 time. And in Ottawa, that's going to be better this year because they got a much better team this year. But I still don't see Jake Sanderson making that much of an impact offensively to really move the needle for fantasy purposes. I do still have him ranked at number 14, though, because Chabot is a little bit injury prone, and if he does get injured, Jake Sanderson should step in as that number 1 D-man, get some top power play time, and have a nice, decent stretch while Chabot is out. Then I have Marco Rossi at number 13, and I actually had him ranked pretty high on my rankings last year, but he didn't end up making the team. Turns out a whole year off because of COVID reason. He was not healthy this previous season. Does impact your development a little bit. But Marco Rossi still could make an impact in the NHL this year. He should be the 3rd line center this year with Boldy and Frederick Gaudreau. It's not the best deployment in the world, but playing with Matt Boldy isn't necessarily bad. I just don't see him doing putting up some crazy fantasy numbers being on the 3rd line. However, if he gets into training camp and really impresses, it is possible that they play him on the top line with Kaprizov and Zuccarello instead of Ryan Hartman. I don't think that's going to happen, but there is a slight possibility if he really does impress in training camp. Then I have Shane Pinto, and I really like Shane Pinto. I had him pretty high on my rankings last year, and I think he would have had a really good year, but he got injured really early on and missed the entire season with that injury, and because of that, he's actually still considered a rookie. Now, why don't I have him as high as I had him last year? Well, the Senators, they brought in some players this year. They brought in Giroux, they brought in DeBrincat, and they're going to fill out the top 2 lines. So the top line is going to stick the same. Tkachuk, Norris, and Batherson, and that second line will probably look something like DeBrincat, Stützle, and Giroux. Now, Pinto doesn't really slot in there. He's a centerman, so he probably takes that 3rd line center role with players like Formenton and Joseph. Now, while that's not a terrible place to be at all, it is still a third line center role, and he's not going to be able to put up some crazy numbers being a third line center. Now, if somebody gets injured and he moved up the lineup, then we could start seeing him produce a little bit more, but that'll have to happen first. And then just outside of my top 10, I have Logan Stankoven of the Dallas Stars, and I do think he has a good chance of making the team this year. If you've been watching the World Juniors, he's actually currently tied for 4th place in the standings for points scored in the World Juniors. He's doing really, really well. Has 4 goals, 5 assists for 9 points in 6 games. Looking really good. He's been making some solid plays, really cementing himself as a really good all-around player. He was also the CHL Player of the Year last year, so don't take that lightly. He's a very solid player, and I think if he continues to impress and look good in Dallas Stars training camp and preseason, he could just crack their roster and honestly could even end up centering their second line. If he does, then he's actually got a significant amount of value. He could end up being on that line with guys like Marchment and Seguin and could actually see a pretty good year. Now, I'm not banking on him making the team necessarily, but if he does, I do think he could have a solid year. Definitely a dark horse for the Calder for sure. So jumping into the top 10 now, guys, and at number 10, I have Owen Power. I know what you guys might be thinking. Owen Power, he was a first overall draft pick. Why on earth is he so low on this list? Well, the simple version of that is he's not going to be seeing that top power play time in Buffalo. Rasmus Dahlin is not going anywhere, and as long as Dahlin is there, Owen Power is not going to see that time. Now, Owen Power is a dynamic, electric player who's going to be so good for so many years. However, this year, I don't see his offensive numbers being that crazy good. Because of that, I can't in good faith put him any higher than number 10 on this list. I think he's still going to have a pretty good year, but he's not going to be in the top 5 rookies, I don't think, this year, unless he really impresses defensively. Now, NHL has him on their list at 123 overall, which in my opinion is way too high, so I would definitely avoid drafting him in this range. I know it's tempting to draft a rookie sometimes, like, oh, let's see how he does. Maybe he'll be an absolute steal. He won't be at this range, so I'm going to advise, staying away from Owen Power. And then next on this list, I have that guy who was supposed to come first overall this year, but didn't actually end up being drafted until 4th overall by the Seattle Kraken. And Shane Wright, if he makes the team, should have a decent year in Seattle. But I say if he makes the team because Seattle is never in a rush to really rush their prospects into the NHL. They didn't rush Beniers last year, and they may not rush Wright into the NHL right away either unless he has a really good training camp and he proves that he belongs in the NHL. If he does have a really solid training camp, at best, Wright is going to be their second line center because Beniers is going to be that number 1 center this year. So, as a second line center, it's not bad. You could still end up playing with guys like Eberle and Schwartz or even a guy like McCann. Could end up still having a pretty solid year. Obviously, there's Bjorkstrand and Burakovsky, so it really depends how they shuffle that line, but Wright could be in line for a pretty good year if he does get that second line deployment with some pretty decent players. Then at number 8, I have William Eklund of the San Jose Sharks. And in a small sample size last year, he managed to score 4 points in 9 games, which isn't bad for someone who is literally 18 years old, just jumping right into the NHL after the draft. Pretty good to start off with. Obviously, after that, he ended up being sent back to the Swedish League so as not to take a year off his contract. But Eklund is someone who I see making the team this year in San Jose and probably ends up playing on their first or second line. So he's going to end up playing with either Hertl or Couture. He's going to be on the wing with one of those two guys. And if he is, he could even end up playing with Timo Meier, which could set him up for a pretty solid fantasy year. Honestly, guys, I have him ranked at 8, but his ceiling is definitely a lot higher. Definitely is one of the contenders for the Calder this year. It just depends how much he's improved over this past year. And let's see how he looks in training camp because Eklund is going to be someone who's going to be a lot of fun to watch this year. And then at number 7, I have Kent Johnson of the Columbus Blue Jackets. He also played 9 games last year, managed to score 3 points, which is pretty good for your opening year. Just a small sample size. And if you guys have been watching the World Juniors, he's been one of the best players there as well for Team Canada. Has scored 8 points in 6 games so far and has looked pretty solid. Did you guys see that Michigan lacrosse style goal he scored? Oh my God, what a beauty that was. He is going to be a dynamic, electric player in the NHL, and I cannot wait to see him in action this year for Columbus. There is no doubt in my mind that he's going to make the team this year, and he should be playing on the top two lines in Columbus, so he's definitely got a real opportunity to compete for the Calder this year. Let's see who he ends up playing with in Columbus, and no matter what, honestly, the top two lines in Columbus are both pretty good. He should be able to compete and put up some solid numbers this year. NHL has him ranked at 214, which is pretty late in the draft as well. So he's also another guy that I do not mind throwing a dart at in a late round of your draft and seeing how he pans out. Then I have the number one pick of the 2022 draft, Juraj Slafkovsky. Now I know everyone was expecting Shane Wright to go first overall, but the Habs decided to throw a curveball and draft Slafkovsky. Now the more I look at it, the more I'm happy about that. Wright seems to be very arrogant, very cocky. You know, it may not end up being a bad thing in the end at the end of the day, but Slafkovsky seems to be a lot more humble, seems to be a really good dude. He's also 6'4", so he's got that size to him, and I think he's just going to provide so much to Montreal for so many years. Now, Slafkovsky I have at number 6 for one simple reason. Assuming he makes a team, which he should, he's probably pretty much locked in to play on that top line with Caulfield and Suzuki, at least at the start of the year. That seems to be the consensus. Everyone's been saying, yeah, Slafkovsky's going to start with Caulfield and Suzuki. And obviously, guys, Caulfield and Suzuki are the two best players on the Habs and pretty much the only two guys really worth owning this year on the Habs, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. But Slafkovsky playing alongside those two guys could seriously have a good year. It just really depends how he adjusts to the NHL. If he plays a few games and it's not really looking that great, he'll probably be sent down and not play the whole year in Montreal. However, there's a really good chance as well that he plays a couple of games with Caulfield and Suzuki and catches fire and looks pretty good. I think he is definitely going to be competing for the Calder this year. I don't think he's going to win, but I think he's going to be up there. NHL has him ranked at 159 though, which is pretty early in the draft, so personally, I'm not going to be drafting him at this range. He could definitely pay off this range if he does catch fire with Caulfield and Suzuki, but it's a little bit risky drafting him this early, so I'm personally going to be staying away from him. It's just too much of a risk for me. Then I have Logan Thompson at number 5, and I actually didn't have him on this list at all until I heard the news about Robin Lehner. Robin Lehner is actually going to be missing the entire season for Vegas. He's not going to play at all. And the backup in Vegas is Laurent Brossoit. Brossoit's a solid goalie, but he's not a starting goalie at all. He's going to be the backup. So Thompson is going to be the starter by default, and he actually started a lot of games last year, looked pretty good. Now, he's going to be removed from this list completely if Vegas goes and trades for a goalie. They have some cap space to do that now with Lehner being out and them having traded Max Pacioretty. They have, a decent amount of cap space to work with now if they really do want to trade for a goalie. Now, Logan Thompson is a pretty good goalie. I think he's going to have a solid year if Vegas decides to just roll with him. And Brossoit's actually injured for the first few weeks as well. So Thompson is definitely going to be starting pretty much every game. Michael Hutchinson will be his backup. So yeah, they're not going to want to start him. So barring a trade for a goalie, Logan Thompson is really going to be thrust into that starting role. And I think he's going to have a really solid year. Vegas is still a good team, even without Pacioretty, even without Lehner. I think he's still going to manage to get a lot of wins. And I think he's going to have a really solid season overall. I can definitely see him competing for the Calder Trophy this year. Then at number 4 on the list, I have Cole Perfetti of the Winnipeg Jets. And he actually made the team last year and probably would have not been a rookie this year had he stayed healthy. But he did get injured, so he has another chance to compete for the Calder this year. And now the reason I have him so high on this list is because he's going to be playing with 2 out of these 5 players. Ehlers, Scheifele, Wheeler, Connor, and Dubois. He's going to be playing with 2 of those guys, pretty much guaranteed. He's going to be playing on the top 6 of Winnipeg. He was last year before he got injured, and I think he's only going to be better this year, guys. I think Perfetti is going to have a really, really good year. NHL has him ranked at 178, and at that range, it's a little bit early, but not too early. I do think it's a decent place to draft Cole Perfetti. Then at number 3, I have Jack Quinn of the Buffalo Sabres. Had an awesome year in the AHL last year with 61 points in 45 games, way over a point per game pace. And in the 2 games he played for Buffalo, had a goal and an assist for 2 points in 2 games, which is a really good start for your NHL career. This dude was drafted 8th overall in 2020. and is just an electric goal scorer. This guy could score like nobody's business. This year I project him being in the top 6 in Buffalo, and I do think he's going to have a hell of a good year. I definitely like Jack Quinn this year. And the bonus is that NHL right now does not have him ranked in their 250 top players at all. And that's why Jack Quinn is my Manscaped must-draft player of the video, because, man, if he's not ranked in the top 250, he's going to be an absolute steal. If you haven't heard already, guys, it's smooth sack summer. Whether you're playing in the summer sun, make sure you're scaped pubes to bum. That's right, this is the summer to keep your balls cool while still looking hot with Manscaped. The leader in below-the-belt grooming is making sure we have a ball this summer by giving our pants partners everything they need to stay fresh. Dive first into smooth sack summer by going to manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping with my code FANTASYTIPPED. That's 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com with my code FANTASYTIPPED. It's smooth sack summer, boys. Get on board or get left behind. So if Yahoo and ESPN don't have him ranked in their top 250 either, Jack Quinn could be a really crazy steal really late in your draft, maybe even the last round of your draft, which would be absolutely insane, because I do think he has the potential of really popping off this year, and I really do think he's going to be one of the top contenders for the Calder this year. Moving on to number 2, Mason McTavish. And I've been watching him in the juniors, and I'm actually awed by how good this guy is. He's got 15 points in 6 games in the juniors so far. That's more than 2 points per game on average. He's been just absolutely insane. Every single game looks freaking fantastic on there, and I've been really tempted to move him up to number 1 on this list. I'm really tempted. I do think he's going to have an amazing opportunity in Anaheim this year. I have him projected, as you guys saw in my Anaheim Ducks video, to play with Zegras and with Terry on that top line. And if that is the top line, that's going to be an amazing line in Anaheim, and I think they're going to light up the league. I do think McTavish is one of the 2 frontrunners for the Calder Trophy, along with the next guy on this list. I do think he's going to have an amazing year, guys. I really like McTavish. NHL has him ranked at only 186 on their list. I do think he can really exceed that ranking, so if he does go around that range, he's probably going to be a real steal. I really like McTavish this year. And at number 1 on this list, I have Matty Beniers of the Seattle Kraken. Now, last year, he really impressed in the 10 games that he played, scoring 9 points. He was a point per game. He actually got a point in every single game he played, except for 1. He got a single point in every other game that he played. Looked really freaking good on the ice, and I think this year he's going to have a real opportunity to play as their number 1 center. Now, Matty Beniers managed to score those points last year playing with terrible line mates. He was playing with Ryan Donato and Victor Rask. Not very good, guys, and they're not the worst NHL players in the world, but he was managing to score a point per game pace playing with those guys. That is super impressive, and this year he's probably going to be their number 1 center. He's probably going to play with guys like Bjorkstrand or Burakovsky or Jordan Eberle or Jared McCann. Literally any of those guys are better than Victor Rask and Ryan Donato. I think that Beniers is primed to have an amazing, amazing season for the Seattle Kraken. And he is definitely, in my opinion, the front runner for the Calder Trophy, although McTavish is pretty close. Now, NHL has him ranked at 110, which I'm not going to lie is pretty early, but I do think he's going to have an amazing season. He's pretty much locked in as that number 1 center this year, and I do think he's going to show everyone exactly what he's made of and take home that Calder Trophy. You heard it here first. And that's it for this video, guys. Do you agree with the list? Let me know down in the comments. Let me know what you agree with, what you don't agree with. We'll have a little conversation in the comments, and we'll dish it out. Before you go, though, please leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. I'll catch you in the next episode of Fantasy Tipped.